Some places hold onto their past like fingers gripping the edge of a cliff. The RMS Queen Mary is one such place. She sits in Long Beach Harbor since 1967. This famous ocean liner draws visitors who come for the history. Many leave with something else, something they cannot explain. The ship has a scary reputation that goes back many years. Crew members, visitors, and ghost hunters have all reported the same strange experiences. Voices in empty hallways, doors that open and close by themselves, the sound of children laughing in rooms where no children should be, temperature drops so sudden and cold that you can see your breath in the California sunshine. What makes these stories so believable is how they match up. The same locations, the same weird things happening, the same feeling that something from the ship's dark past will not let go. The Queen Mary was not always a floating museum. For 30 years, she ruled the Atlantic Ocean. She carried rich and famous people across the ocean in luxury. She moved thousands of soldiers through the dangerous waters of World War II. She saw births, deaths, parties, and tragedies. Every emotion that humans can feel played out within her steel walls. Maybe that is why she cannot rest. Building of the Queen Mary started in 1930 at the John Brown shipyard in Scotland. The ship was designed to be the largest and most fancy passenger liner ever built. Her first trip in 1936 marked the start of an era when crossing the Atlantic was still an adventure for the wealthy and the brave. At over 1,000 feet long, the Queen Mary was a floating city. She could carry more than 2,000 passengers and 1,200 crew members. Her fancy interiors were filled with expensive woods, fine metals, and beautiful fabrics. The first-class rooms rivaled the finest hotels in the world. Even the second-class quarters offered comforts that most people could only dream of. But the Queen Mary's peaceful years as a luxury liner were short. When World War II started, the British government took the ship for military service. She was painted grey and changed into a troopship. Her fancy dining rooms became mess halls. Her elegant rooms were packed with bunk beds. Instead of wealthy passengers drinking champagne, she carried soldiers heading to war. The change was dramatic and needed. The Queen Mary could move an entire division of troops in a single crossing. Her speed made her valuable. She was fast enough to outrun German submarines and large enough to carry thousands of men at once. The ship became known as the Grey Ghost. She slipped through dangerous waters with her precious human cargo. During her wartime service, the Queen Mary carried more than 800,000 military people. She sailed alone. She relied on her speed rather than escort ships for protection. The plan worked most of the time. German submarines simply could not keep up with her, but the constant danger took its toll on everyone aboard. The ship's most tragic wartime event happened on the 2nd of October, 1942. The Queen Mary was traveling in a zigzag pattern to avoid submarine attacks when she hit her escort cruiser, HMS Curacoa. The smaller ship was cut in half and sank within minutes. More than 300 sailors died in the freezing Atlantic waters. The Queen Mary was damaged but could still sail. Under strict orders to keep radio silence and continue her mission, the ship could not stop to rescue survivors. Captain Gordon Illingworth had to make an impossible choice: stop and risk the lives of the 10,000 American troops aboard, or keep sailing and leave the drowning sailors behind. He kept sailing. The guilt and trauma of that decision haunted many of the Queen Mary's crew for the rest of their lives. Some say it haunts the ship itself. After the war ended, the Queen Mary returned to passenger service. The fancy interiors were restored. The grey paint was replaced with the ship's original colors. For another 2 decades, she continued to carry passengers across the Atlantic. But the age of ocean liners was ending. Air travel was becoming faster and cheaper. By the 1960s, the Queen Mary was losing money. In 1967, the ship made her final voyage. Instead of being scrapped like so many other great liners, she was sold to the city of Long Beach, California. The plan was to turn her into a floating hotel and museum. The Queen Mary would begin a new chapter of her life. But the ghosts of her past were coming along for the ride. The ghost reports began almost right away after the ship's change. Workers fixing the vessel reported strange sounds and unexplained cold spots. Tools went missing and showed up in impossible locations. Some workers refused to go into certain areas of the ship alone. The most common ghost stories centered around the ship's swimming pools. Both the first-class and tourist-class pools had been drained and closed during the renovation. But visitors and staff regularly heard the sounds of splashing water and children's laughter echoing from the empty pools. Security guards patrolling the ship at night reported seeing wet footprints leading away from the pools. The footprints were always small, like those of a child. They would appear on the dry decks and then simply vanish, as if whoever made them had disappeared into thin air. One of the most scary encounters involved a maintenance worker named Robert Martinez. In 1978, Martinez was working alone in the area near the first-class pool when he heard children playing. The sounds were so clear and real that he went to check. He thought that a group of kids had somehow gotten past security. The pool area was empty. The sounds stopped the moment he entered the room. Martinez stood in the silence, looking at the empty, drained pool. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A child's voice, clear as day, asking him to come and play. Martinez left the area right away and refused to work alone in that part of the ship again. His report was filed with security, but it was far from the only one. Over the years, dozens of workers and visitors would report similar experiences in the pool areas. The Queen Mary's most famous ghost is a woman in white who appears in different locations throughout the ship. She has been seen in the ballroom, walking the deck, and standing at the ship's rail looking out at the ocean. Witnesses describe her as elegant and sad, wearing a 1930s-style evening gown. Most encounters with the woman in white follow a similar pattern. Witnesses see her from far away and think she is another visitor, or maybe an actress playing a role for tourists. But when they get closer to her or try to take a photograph, she simply vanishes. Dana Stevens, a hotel guest in 1982, had one of the most detailed encounters with the woman in white. Stevens was staying in a room on the sun deck when she was awakened by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Through the porthole, she could see a figure in white walking slowly along the deck. Stevens thought it was a fellow guest who could not sleep and had gone for a late-night walk. But something about the figure's movements seemed strange. She was gliding rather than walking. Her feet did not seem to touch the deck. Curious, Stevens got out of bed and looked through the porthole again. The woman was now standing at the ship's rail, motionless, staring out at the dark harbor. Stevens watched for several minutes, but the figure never moved. Finally, Stevens decided to go back to bed. When she looked out the porthole one last time, the woman was gone. The next morning, Stevens mentioned what happened to the hotel staff. The desk clerk's face went pale when Stevens described what she had seen. The clerk explained that other guests had reported similar sightings, always in the same location. Always the same mysterious woman in white. Room B340 has earned a reputation as the most haunted room on the Queen Mary. The room was originally a first-class cabin, but it was changed to crew quarters during the ship's later years of passenger service. Hotel guests who stayed in B340 reported so many disturbing experiences that the room was finally taken out of service. The problems in B340 seemed to center around the room's bathroom. Guests reported hearing voices coming from behind the bathroom walls. The voices were muffled but clearly human. They spoke in languages that guests could not identify. Some guests reported hearing what sounded like arguments or fights taking place in the walls. Temperature changes in B340 were extreme and unexplainable. Guests would wake up to find their room so cold that ice had formed on the bathroom fixtures. This happened despite the ship's heating system working perfectly in other areas. Others reported the opposite problem, temperatures rising to unbearable levels for no reason. Peter Wilson, a businessman from San Diego, stayed in B340 in 1986. Wilson did not believe in ghost stories and had specifically asked for the room after hearing about its reputation. He wanted to prove that the ghost reports were nothing more than imagination. Wilson's doubt did not last long. On his first night in the room, he was awakened by the sound of running water. The bathroom faucets were turned on full blast. The tub was overflowing. Wilson was certain he had turned everything off before going to bed. He shut off the water and went back to sleep. He thought there was a problem with the plumbing. The second night, Wilson was awakened by voices. Men's voices speaking in what sounded like an urgent, heated conversation. The voices seemed to be coming from inside the bathroom walls. Wilson put his ear to the wall and could clearly hear at least 3 different men talking, but he could not make out the words. Wilson called the front desk to complain about noise from a room next door. The desk clerk checked the hotel records and told Wilson that the rooms on both sides of B340 were empty. There were no other guests in that section of the ship. By the third night, Wilson was ready to leave. He had experienced unexplained cold spots, strange sounds, and the constant feeling that he was being watched. But it was the final incident that convinced him to check out early. Wilson was lying in bed when he felt the mattress pressed down, as if someone had sat down next to him. The dent in the mattress was clearly visible. Wilson could feel the shift in weight, but no one was there. He reached out to touch the spot and felt nothing but empty air. Wilson left the Queen Mary the next morning and never returned. His experience was typical of guests who stayed in B340. The room developed such a negative reputation that the hotel management finally decided to seal it off from public use. The ship's engine room is another hotspot for ghost activity. During the Queen Mary's active years, the engine room was one of the most dangerous areas of the ship. The massive machinery, extreme heat, and toxic fumes created a hostile environment for the men who worked there. Several crew members died in engine room accidents over the years. Modern visitors to the engine room frequently report the feeling of being watched. Tour guides have learned to expect reports of shadowy figures moving among the machinery. The figures appear to be working, going through the motions of operating equipment that has been silent for decades. Temperature problems in the engine room are common and well documented. Digital thermometers register sudden drops of 20 degrees or more in specific areas. The cold spots move around the room. They follow no clear pattern. Visitors often report feeling as though they have walked through an invisible wall of cold air. One of the most compelling engine room encounters happened during a 1995 ghost investigation. The research team was using equipment to measure unusual energy readings when their instruments began registering massive spikes in activity. The readings were so high that the investigators first thought their equipment was broken. But the energy spikes happened at the same time as other phenomena. The team's cameras captured unusual light shapes moving through the engine room. Audio equipment picked up sounds that resembled machinery operation. Even though all the engines had been shut down for nearly 30 years, the most startling evidence came from the team's thermal imaging camera. The device clearly showed human-shaped heat signatures moving through the engine room. The signatures appeared to be performing work routines, climbing stairs and operating controls. But when team members looked with their naked eyes, they saw nothing. The investigation team returned to the engine room multiple times over the following months. Each visit produced similar results. The energy readings, the audio evidence, and the thermal signatures all suggested that the engine room was still occupied by the spirits of men who had once worked there. The Queen Mary's kitchen areas have their own collection of strange events. Restaurant staff and hotel employees regularly report the smell of cooking food coming from kitchens that have been closed for hours. The aromas are specific and realistic. They range from fresh bread to roasted meat to exotic spices. Kitchen equipment that has been shut off and unplugged will sometimes turn on by itself. Ovens heat up without being turned on. Mixers start running with no one near the controls. Dishwashers cycle through complete wash routines despite being empty. The kitchen phenomena seem to follow the ship's original meal schedules. The mysterious cooking smells appear most frequently during what would have been breakfast, lunch, and dinner service during the ship's ocean liner days. Staff members have learned to expect the phantom aromas at specific times of day. Maria Gonzalez worked as a supervisor in the Queen Mary's restaurant operations for more than 15 years. She experienced the kitchen phenomena countless times, but was never able to explain what caused them. Gonzalez kept detailed logs of the incidents. She noted patterns and tried to find logical explanations. According to Gonzalez's records, the kitchen disturbances increased during periods when the ship was hosting large events or celebrations. It was as if the phantom kitchen staff were responding to the increased activity aboard the ship, preparing meals for guests who were no longer there. The most dramatic kitchen incident occurred during a 1990 wedding reception. Gonzalez was overseeing the catering operation when the main kitchen's gas burners ignited at the same time without being turned on. All 6 burner units flamed to life at the same moment, creating a wall of fire that sent kitchen staff scrambling for safety. The gas lines were immediately shut off, and the kitchen was evacuated. Fire department investigators found no mechanical cause for the incident. The gas valves were in the off position. There was no evidence of electrical malfunction. The burners should not have been able to ignite. But the wedding reception continued, and the kitchen phenomena continued with it. Throughout the evening, staff reported the sounds of busy kitchen operation coming from the sealed-off cooking area, pots and pans clanging, orders being called out, the rhythm of a functioning restaurant kitchen in full swing. The Queen Mary's isolation during the renovation period may have contributed to the ghost activity. For several years, the ship sat nearly empty, while workers slowly converted her from ocean liner to hotel. During this time, security guards working alone on the ship reported some of the most intense supernatural encounters. Night shift security was considered the most difficult assignment. Guards patrolling the empty ship regularly reported footsteps echoing through corridors they had just walked. Doors that they had checked and secured would be found open minutes later. Elevators would move between floors with no one operating them. The sounds of a functioning ship were perhaps the most unnerving. Guards would hear the creaking and settling noises of a vessel at sea, even though the Queen Mary was firmly attached to the dock. The sounds of running water, humming machinery, and distant conversations would drift through the empty corridors. Frank Morrison worked as a security guard during the renovation period and experienced phenomena that he still cannot explain. Morrison was a veteran of 20 years in law enforcement and considered himself a practical, no-nonsense type of person. But his experiences on the Queen Mary challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. Morrison's most disturbing encounter occurred during a routine midnight patrol. He was walking through the first-class dining room when he heard the sound of a large crowd of people talking and laughing. The sounds were muffled but clearly identifiable as a dinner party or social gathering. Morrison followed the sounds to their apparent source and found himself in the ship's ballroom. The room was empty and dark, but the sounds of music and conversation continued. Morrison could hear an orchestra playing, people dancing, the clink of glasses and the murmur of dozens of conversations. Morrison stood in the empty ballroom, listening to the phantom party. The sounds were so realistic that he checked his radio to make sure he was not picking up interference from a local broadcast. But his radio was silent. The sounds were coming from the ballroom itself. The phantom party continued for nearly an hour. Morrison sat in the darkness, listening to the echoes of celebrations that had taken place decades earlier. When the sounds finally faded, the ballroom returned to its usual silence. Morrison completed his patrol, but he never forgot that night. The Queen Mary's wartime history adds another layer to the ghost activity. Many of the reported ghosts appear to be soldiers or sailors from the ship's military service period. Witnesses describe figures in uniform wandering the corridors, often appearing lost or confused. The area where military personnel bunked during wartime voyages is particularly active. Visitors report hearing marching footsteps, military commands being shouted, the sounds of large groups of men talking. The voices often seem agitated or distressed, as if the speakers are experiencing fear or uncertainty. Some of the military spirits appear to be searching for something or someone. They are seen looking into rooms, checking doorways, calling out names. The behavior suggests that these spirits are still trying to carry out duties or find comrades from their wartime service. The collision with HMS Curacoa continues to show up in supernatural ways. Sensitive visitors to the ship often report sensing overwhelming feelings of guilt and regret in certain areas. The emotions are so strong that some people become physically ill and have to leave the ship. Crew members from the Queen Mary's active years occasionally reported seeing figures in British naval uniforms standing at the ship's rail. The figures would appear at night, looking out over the water with expressions of profound sadness. They were believed to be the spirits of sailors who died in the collision. The tragedy of the Curacoa incident created lasting trauma that seems to have imprinted itself on the Queen Mary. The ship's inability to stop and rescue survivors violated every maritime tradition and code of honor. That violation may have created a spiritual wound that has never healed. Modern ghost investigators have brought sophisticated equipment to study the Queen Mary's supernatural activity. Their findings support many of the stories from staff and visitors. Electronic voice recordings capture voices speaking in empty rooms. Equipment detects unexplained energy patterns throughout the ship. Thermal imaging cameras regularly record human-shaped heat signatures in areas where no living people are present. Motion detectors activate without apparent cause. Night vision cameras capture shadowy figures moving through corridors and rooms. The consistency of the evidence across different investigation teams and time periods suggests that the phenomena are genuine rather than hoaxes or mistakes. Multiple independent researchers have documented similar findings using different equipment and methods. Dr. Richard Estep, a ghost investigator who has spent extensive time studying the Queen Mary, describes the ship as one of the most actively haunted locations he has encountered. According to Estep, the ship contains so much supernatural activity that investigators can expect to document phenomena during virtually every visit. The sheer volume of supernatural activity on the Queen Mary raises questions about what creates such intense haunting. The ship's history includes every type of human experience that might leave a spiritual imprint: luxury and poverty, celebration and tragedy, life and death, all played out within her hull. The Queen Mary was also a closed environment for decades. The same people lived and worked on the ship for extended periods, creating intense emotional bonds with the vessel itself. When those people died, either on the ship or years later, their connection to the Queen Mary may have drawn their spirits back. The ship's conversion from ocean liner to stationary hotel may have disrupted whatever spiritual balance existed. The renovations changed the ship's internal layout and purpose. Spirits accustomed to the ship's original configuration might have become confused or distressed by the alterations. Physical changes to the ship could have created new supernatural activity. Walls were removed, rooms were reconfigured, areas that had been sealed were opened. The construction work may have released spirits that had been trapped or contained for decades. Some researchers believe that the Queen Mary's steel construction acts as a conductor for supernatural energy. The ship's metal hull and framework could amplify and retain spiritual imprints more effectively than other building materials. This might explain why the ghost activity is so intense and persistent. The magnetic fields generated by the ship's electrical systems might also play a role in the supernatural phenomena. Some theories suggest that ghosts require magnetic energy to manifest. The Queen Mary's complex electrical grid could provide an ideal environment for spiritual activity. The Queen Mary's location in Long Beach Harbor may contribute to the supernatural intensity. The ship sits in water, Many supernatural researchers believe this enhances psychic phenomena. The harbor setting also isolates the ship from the magnetic interference of the city, creating a relatively clean environment for spiritual activity. Water has been associated with supernatural phenomena in many cultures throughout history. The Queen Mary spent 30 years surrounded by ocean water. Now she sits permanently in harbor water. This constant aquatic environment might create ideal conditions for supernatural manifestations. The ship's aging infrastructure could also play a role in the supernatural activity. As the Queen Mary's mechanical systems deteriorate, new sounds and movements occur throughout the vessel. Some of these could be mistaken for supernatural phenomena. Others might actually trigger genuine supernatural responses. The Queen Mary's role as a tourist attraction brings thousands of people aboard every year. Each visitor contributes their own energy and emotions to the ship's environment. The constant flow of human activity might feed the supernatural phenomena, providing energy for spirits to draw upon. Children seem particularly sensitive to the Queen Mary's supernatural activity. Young visitors frequently report seeing and hearing things that adults miss. They point to empty spaces and ask about people who are not there. They hear sounds that do not register with adult ears. The pool areas remain the most active locations for supernatural encounters involving children. The spirits of young passengers who died on the ship, either from illness or accident, seem to gather in areas where they once played. Their presence is often accompanied by the sounds of laughter and splashing. Some families have cut their visits short after their children became frightened by unseen presences. The children describe seeing other kids who want to play but disappear when approached. They report hearing voices calling their names and feeling invisible hands tugging at their clothes. The Queen Mary's supernatural activity continues to evolve and change. New phenomena are reported regularly. This suggests that the supernatural environment remains active and dynamic. Staff members note that certain areas become more or less active over time, as if the spiritual presence ebbs and flows like tides. Seasonal variations in supernatural activity have been observed by long-term staff members. The supernatural phenomena seem to intensify during autumn and winter months, when the ship's tragic wartime history might resonate more strongly. Anniversary dates of significant events also see increased activity. The Queen Mary's ghosts appear to be intelligent and interactive rather than simple replays of past events. They respond to the presence of visitors. They alter their behavior based on circumstances. They seem aware of changes to the ship's environment. This suggests that whatever spirits inhabit the Queen Mary retain consciousness and personality. Some spirits seem protective of the ship and its visitors. Security guards report feeling watched over during their patrols, as if unseen guardians are ensuring their safety. Other spirits appear more mischievous, hiding objects or playing harmless pranks on staff and guests. The diversity of supernatural personalities on the Queen Mary reflects the ship's complex history. Passengers from different social classes, crew members from various departments, and military personnel from different conflicts all left their mark on the vessel. Their spirits continue to coexist in the same confined space where they once lived. The Queen Mary's future remains uncertain. The ship requires constant maintenance to prevent deterioration. Funding for preservation efforts is always a challenge. If the ship's physical condition continues to decline, the supernatural activity might change or even disappear along with the vessel itself. Some researchers believe that the spirits are tied to the ship's physical structure. If the Queen Mary were to be significantly altered or demolished, the supernatural phenomena might end. Others think the spirits are tied to the location rather than the ship itself. They would remain even if the vessel were removed. The possibility of the Queen Mary sinking at her moorings is a real concern for preservationists. The ship's hull shows signs of age and stress. Catastrophic failure could occur without warning. If the Queen Mary were to sink, would her ghosts sink with her? Or would they remain to haunt the harbor waters? These questions may never be answered. The Queen Mary exists in a state of preserved decay, maintained just enough to prevent collapse, but slowly succumbing to time and salt water corrosion. Her spirits seem as permanent as the ship herself, trapped in an endless voyage that leads nowhere. The Queen Mary remains one of the most convincing cases for the existence of supernatural phenomena. The consistency of reports across decades, the variety of witnesses from different backgrounds, and the physical evidence captured by investigators all support the conclusion that something unexplainable occurs aboard the ship. Whether the Queen Mary's ghosts are actual spirits of the dead, psychic imprints of traumatic events, or something else entirely, their presence continues to affect everyone who encounters them. The ship serves as a window into mysteries that science has yet to solve, and questions that rational thought cannot answer. The Queen Mary's story is far from over. As long as the ship remains afloat, her ghostly passengers and crew will continue their eternal voyage. They share their space with the living visitors who come to experience a piece of maritime history. But those visitors often leave with more than they bargained for. They leave with the knowledge that death may not be the end, that the past refuses to stay buried, that some journeys continue long after the destination has been reached. The Queen Mary sails on through time, carrying her cargo of memories, mysteries, and spirits that refuse to leave. What secrets still hide in the Queen Mary's steel corridors? What stories remain untold in her empty rooms? What happens to a ship's soul when her sailing days are over, but her purpose has not yet been fulfilled? These questions linger like morning fog over Long Beach Harbor. The Queen Mary waits at her permanent berth. She waits for the next visitor to walk her decks, the next investigator to probe her mysteries, the next skeptic to become a believer. The ship that once ruled the Atlantic now rules a smaller but no less mysterious realm. She is no longer the gray ghost of the wartime seas. She has become something more eternal, more haunting. She has become the ghost ship that never truly left port, forever anchored between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The Queen Mary's voyage through eternity has only just begun. If you have had your own encounters with the unexplained or know of similar mysteries that deserve investigation, share your experiences in the comments below. Subscribe for more tales that blur the line between history and the supernatural. Remember that some stories never truly end.